Hello, and welcome to the ADA Celebration Rally, and congratulations to the Americans with Disabilities Act on its 34th anniversary. Thank you to Showability, the Bobby Dodd Institute, the Southeast ADA Center, Disability Link, and Disability Awareness Now for today's gathering, and to the many sponsors of today's event, including Amazon. My name is Dr. Anjali Forber-Pratt, and I am the Director of Research with the American Association on Health and Disability. For those who don't know us, our main mission is to promote and ensure health equity for people with disabilities through policy, research, education, and dissemination. A brief visual description: I have long black hair up in a ponytail and have brown skin, and I'm wearing a blue shirt and a black blazer today, sitting in a manual wheelchair that's not seen on screen, and I have a virtual background with the American Association on Health and Disabilities logo showing. I acquired my disability, transverse myelitis, when I was 4.5 months old and became paralyzed from the waist down. About 6 years later, George H.W. Bush made history when he signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law. This civil rights legislation prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in all areas of public life. As a 6-year-old, I do not remember this as a monumentous occasion, but I do remember as a young child, I thought everyone in the whole world had a disability and that it was just a phase I was one day going to outgrow. But I also thought in order to grow up and to go to college, have a job, start a family, to live on my own, I thought I first had to learn how to walk because every adult I knew could walk. So in my mind, I held this assumption that in order to gain access to these opportunities, I had to make my disability disappear. Living within the 8-mile marker of the Boston Marathon, everyone in the whole town goes out to support this event. And one of my earliest memories, which happened to be right around this time of ADA becoming law, was going out to watch this event and seeing the thousands of runners go by. And the strangest thing happened. That's when I saw people in racing wheelchairs whizzing by, going 25 miles per hour, and I was blown away. It was life-changing because these were athletes with disabilities who also went to college, had jobs, had families and dreams. And I knew from that moment on, this was something I wanted to check out for myself. Eventually, I was able to meet adults with disabilities and learn that I could grow up to be somebody despite my disability. I went on to represent Team USA in 2 Paralympic Games in the sport of wheelchair racing. And it was because of the Americans with Disabilities Act and its precursors that people with disabilities are able to be contributing members of society and hold jobs. My life is forever changed and filled with opportunities because of this important piece of legislation. You know, when I reflect back now on the Americans with Disabilities Act, I also have to share that I had the unfortunate opportunity of going to a high school that was completely inaccessible for students with disabilities. I had an English teacher who said, "What are you doing in an honors level English class? It's not like you can go to college anyway." I opted not to opt out of that English class, but there was this one assignment where we were asked to write about a rule or law that we felt passionately about. Guess what I picked? The Americans with Disabilities Act. I stayed up late reading the legislation cover to cover and got engaged with local trainings to educate others about the Americans with Disabilities Act. This knowledge about the ADA gave me confidence to take on that school district and to fight for my own right to receive an education and to not be discriminated on the basis of my disability. Ultimately, my federal lawsuit was one of the first where punitive and compensatory damages were awarded under the Americans with Disabilities Act in a public education case. And it really was one of my proudest accomplishments. And it really meant that it helped to make the world a more accessible place for those coming after me. While we cannot ignore the experience of how this important piece of legislation came to be, we also have to remember that this legislation was the floor, not the ceiling, meaning that 34 years later, there are still many inaccessible and access barriers faced by people with disabilities in society and room for strengthening. In fact, this year alone, there were monumental updates to the Americans with Disabilities Act that improved web and mobile app accessibility standards for state and local governments. I'm sure that many of you are likely disabled and may have some of your own activism stories, or you may have a friend or a loved one who's been impacted by disability that drew you to this work. But you are now in this space, and we need you all to keep educating on this so often forgotten piece of legislation. Together, we can motivate others to think proactively about disability and for disability to no longer be an afterthought. The time is now. So please keep educating about the ADA. Thank you for celebrating its 34th anniversary. You are helping to change the world and to make it a more inclusive and accessible place. Thank you.